Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. We begin tonight in Whitehorse, where two church-run dormitories that operated during the 1960s and 70s to house Indigenous students attending school in the city. They've long since been demolished, but searches using ground-penetrating radar have begun in an effort to locate possible unmarked graves. Sarah Connors has the details.
There's not too much to see here now, but this baseball diamond in Whitehorse's Riverdale neighborhood was once the site of Cordair Hall, a former dormitory for Indigenous students who attended school in Whitehorse. Over the next 2 weeks, a small technical crew will conduct a ground search of the area, as well as the former site of Yukon Hall, another former dormitory just a few hundred yards away. It's part of a territory-wide project to search the sites of former residential schools and associated buildings for evidence of unmarked graves.
It's been really heavy, and my first thought is, how are we going to support the individuals who are most affected?
The searches are taking place on the settlement lands of the Ta'anquachin Council and Kwanlin First Nation. Chiefs Amanda Lees and Sean Smith hope the search will bring closure for survivors and their families.
You know, in order to move forward in a good way and to put the past where it belongs, we really do need to find these answers.
The church-affiliated dormitories operated in the 1960s and 70s. Both buildings were later demolished. In the 1990s, a former Cordair Hall employee was convicted for sexually assaulting students. For Chief Smith, the search is a way to acknowledge the past and move forward.
And how we can look at those opportunities to acknowledge what happened in those schools, but as well as how we grow and how we begin our own healing.
The search wraps up May 4th. It will be another few months until results are released.
We just need to ensure that we're providing the answers where we need to, and we can put a little bit of closure to it.
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
The National Indian Residential School Crisis Line is available for survivors and others who might need support. That number is 1-866-925-4419. To Manitoba now, where a man is dead following a police shooting in Sandy Bay First Nation over the weekend. His name has not been released, but police say he was 27 years old. In a press release, Manitoba RCMP say that on Saturday, the Manitoba First Nation Police Service called them for help with a weapons complaint at a home in the community. They were told a suspect was threatening a female. The suspect fled the scene before officers arrived. Both police services tracked the suspect to an open area where he was found armed with multiple weapons. Police say a use of force encounter followed, and one of their officers shot the suspect. In the press release, RCMP say they performed life-saving measures, but the suspect died. The Independent Investigation Unit of Manitoba is now investigating. Prime Minister Trudeau was in Saskatoon today to continue where he left off with last week's federal budget. Part of his campaign-like tour stopped at the Winiskewin Cultural Centre.
Everyone in this country deserves to have equitable, safe, and culturally appropriate health care.
Prime Minister said $390 million will go towards a virtual health hub at the Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technologies. The Institute will use part of that money to improve ultrasound services to remote communities using robotic arms. The Institute will train people how to use the remotely operated arms. We'll have more on that story in the coming days. Residents of the Cold Lake First Nations in Alberta are allowed back today after an evacuation order yesterday forced 10 families from their homes. Air and ground crews were able to extinguish the fire earlier today, and in northern Alberta, an evacuation alert has been cancelled for the hamlet of Sapray Creek Estates after a wildfire 67 hectares in size has been held. The fire is only 24 kilometers southeast from Fort McMurray, which was heavily damaged in a massive wildfire in 2016. Across Alberta, there are still 66 wildfires. With ice breakup season quickly approaching in the Northwest Territories, residents affected by the 2022 floods are still picking up the pieces. Our reporter Charlotte Moore-Jacobs has more.
This spring marks the 2-year anniversary of the historic flooding of the Hay River in the Northwest Territories. And for residents, the road to recovery is ongoing.
The house is shifting. So these big beams here are moving every once in a while when it warms up.
Karen Flecker didn't have house insurance on Vail Island in the town of Hay River. Instead, she solely relied on territorial disaster relief contractors. But many people APTN spoke with here said the contract company did insufficient work before ultimately going bankrupt.
Very poorly done. You could tell it was rushed. It was time limited. I couldn't be on them all the time to go check to see whether or not they were doing the scope of work that they're supposed to.
The circumstances aren't uncommon. Some houses were deemed ineligible for insurance because they reside on a floodplain. Flecker rents a house to her daughter Ashley Flecker in nearby West Point First Nation. The community of 75 was severely affected from flooding.
It's very traumatizing, like coming back and like having to see like all the damage that was done and like the things that were lost.
The same contractors were tasked with repairs on Flecker's home, but according to the disaster relief funding, the case is closed.
Oh, I have a list of problems since the flood inside anyways.
Cracked seams and cupboards being torn away from walls from a constantly shifting home. Meanwhile, the federal government is promising more than $1.16 million in funding to better protect the west channel of Hay River. This will include the critical rebuild of berms. Across the river on Katloditche First Nation, Agnes Fabian was working in British Columbia during the flood, so the band helped her gut the house, but it remains uninhabitable now. With nowhere to go and long housing wait lists, she lives with her elderly mother.
Like if I was to walk in there now, because the basement was gutted and the main foundation is so unsteady, you could actually feel the house shifting as you walk through the home.
Many residents around here are still displaced, living in hotels, including KFN's chief, April Martel. She says while the reserve deals with Canada directly, they were originally receiving disaster relief funding from the territorial government, but it's complicated.
I told Canada and I explained to GNWT, I'm like, you know, our people have been living in these homes for so long that, you know, and you didn't properly assess the homes. Like the GNWT got a third party to do the assessment of our homes on KFN and it wasn't properly assessed.
She said the GNWT's third-party contractors didn't work out for the 60 houses damaged from the flood. But there is progress. The band has taken back control of renovations and repairs with a new builder. Pads are being laid and new houses are going up to replace those lost from flooding and the 2023 wildfires on KFN.
It's really good to see them like arriving in the community internally. Like there's a lot of work to make sure that before they move in, they have their furniture, they have their washers and dryers, they have their they have a kit, and when they get home, then we have to bring like mental awareness and bring somebody in there to talk to them. And
territorial after-action reviews for the Decho flood of 2021 and the South Slave flood of 2022 take up to 2 years to complete. The government says they are currently seeking feedback on recovery from the Hay River flood for a report to be released this fall.
We've noticed that the public needs a bit more clarity on what an evacuation notice means and what they should be doing when there's a notice issued. Likewise for the alert and the order as well.
Charlotte Moore-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
Thanks, Charlotte. Our Angel Moore was in New York City last week covering the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples. We'll hear from her after the break. Welcome back. The Friendship Centre in Latuque, Quebec provides a variety of services to the region's urban Indigenous population. One group the Friendship Centre wants to help is urban Indigenous men. For them, they offer a retreat and the chance to begin a healing journey. Shushan Bacon visited the retreat, which is about 300 kilometers northeast of Montreal, and met some of the men it's helping.
C'est juste pour voir la compréhension que vous en avez. Quand vous avez les besoins et les désirs, séparez votre...
A workshop at the Naroski Resource Center, where men learn to work on themselves, as Mathis Izerov Chechai attests.
La paix. Il y a de quoi à l'intérieur là, qui a changé. Je me sens plus vivant.
Tout le monde le sait, on a besoin de se nourrir pour survivre.
This place of healing is in the Atikamekw territory of Wimontashi. And the service is called Zirumonkowin, which means standing strong. It is available 24/7. According to Lauriane Petitquet, the executive director of the Latuque Friendship Center, registrations are continuous and ongoing.
C'est une toute nouvelle ressource par et pour les hommes autochtones, donc 18 ans et plus, où est-ce qu'on leur offre là, la possibilité d'entamer un processus vers la guérison, mais par les activités en territoire, donc le mode de vie en territoire.
Ton besoin, c'est un habitat.
Les hommes doivent faire. C'est volontaire, donc toutes les demandes sont traitées d'une façon volontaire. Il y a une évaluation qui est faite, ils ont accès à des services en santé. Nous avons une clinique ici, donc une offre de services de soins de santé, où est-ce qu'il y a des infirmières cliniciennes qui participent à cette démarche-là.
There are currently 7 residents. Kainan Cléry is one of them. He is a Atikamekw from Opitsawan and has resided at Naroski since December 2023. His stay was court-ordered, but he found he was in his element at Naroski, learning his ancestors' traditional knowledge.
Je vais peut-être devenir comme un de mes chums qui travaille ici. Devenir un genre d'intervenant pour aider les hommes ou les enfants.
Cléry says he looks forward to seeing his family again when his stay comes to an end. Holistic outreach worker Denis Michel Petitquet is one of the founders of the service. He is the son of residential school survivors who spent much of his previous life addicted to alcohol and drugs. Helping these men is important to him.
Parce qu'il n'y a pas d'aide pour les hommes. Il n'y a rien pour les hommes en ville. Il y a tout le temps pour les femmes. C'est pas que je suis sexiste, mais sauf qu'on n'a rien pour aider les hommes. Ils sont à laisser à eux-mêmes. Puis il y en a aussi des judiciarisés qui sont dans les communautés. Ils passent en cours en ville. Ils s'en vont en prison. Ils n'ont pas le droit d'aller dans les communautés. C'est ça que ça venait me chercher.
Petitquet explains that men learn to reconnect with nature with seasonal cultural activities, like this pot that has been simmering for 2 days to make maple syrup.
Oh, ça, c'est un arc que j'ai cassé tout à l'heure, là.
The men also learn how to build tools. Here is Mathis Izerov Chechai showing off his ongoing project. He has been a volunteer resident of Naroski for 6 months.
Ici, c'est pour se ressourcer. Mais je veux pas vivre trop non plus dans le futur pour pas être trop anxieux. Puis pas non plus dans le passé pour pas être abaissé par les erreurs. Juste au moment présent pour être heureux, pour être vivant. Là.
He admits that he would have never accepted an interview like this before he arrived.
Je l'aurais jamais fait. Avant, j'étais beaucoup réservé. Je parlais pas beaucoup aux gens. Ça m'a aidé ici.
He adds that he is not yet ready to leave. In 2 years, approximately 200 First Nations men have stayed at the Naroski site, and every single one of them finds answers at his own pace. A report by Shushan Bacon, read by Maricela Amador, APTN National News, Wimontashi, Quebec.
The United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues kicked off last week. About 2,000 participants attended, and for the first time, APTN News was on site in New York City as our Atlantic Canada reporter Angel Moore traded in riding in lobster boats for taxi cabs. Angel joined Savannah Kelly earlier this week to tell us more about her experience in the Big Apple.
Hi, Angel. Thanks for joining us. So how was your experience reporting from the UN?
Oh, it was amazing. It was really something to see. I think there was over 2,000 people attending, and it was amazing to see people come from all over the world coming together and speaking with each other. And the atmosphere was a friendliness, a unity. This year was a focus of self-determination and emphasizing Indigenous youth. So there were a lot of youth there, and it was really inspiring to see the youth presenting their concerns about their communities and what they need and you know what is going on, and really listening to these youth, you realize that you're actually watching the future, our future leaders. So it was quite impressive.
And with so many events happening, what was the most memorable one for you?
I would say there's two, but the first one was on the first day. Everyone goes into the General Assembly, and everyone is wearing their traditional clothing and regalia, and that's the first day, and it's quite emotional because you realize, you know, this is one of few events where Indigenous people worldwide can come together and raise their concerns about accountability and self-determination and protection, and you hear what's going on everywhere. So it was quite something. That was an emotional day to set the tone at the beginning. But what probably was the most memorable was not at the United Nations itself. It was in Times Square. The Abenaki Nation of Quebec rented a billboard, and it came on every hour for 1 minute, and the billboard said, Stop Indigenous identity fraud. And that was the night before they held their side event on the same topic. So the Abenaki leaders came together, and the youth ambassadors came in Times Square, and we watched it all lit up, and it was quite emotional. And that set the tone for the side event the next day, which was very informative. And they spoke about the harms of identity fraud. And what was interesting was that they spoke about the harms to the culture and to the languages. You know, they're practicing their culture and languages from their elders and elders of elders, and you know, back generations. And they made a note that identity fraud really risks all that culture and traditions and practices, because the alleged identity fraud does not go back generations, right? Because they don't have it. So it was a very informative side event as well.
And I think I might know what your answer would be to this, but do you think the event's worth it?
Oh yes, yeah. So it was worth it because you know, coming out of COVID and all the Zoom meetings, you know, and the telephone meetings that we've all been doing, and you know, it's still a practice today. But to come together in person, and you know, people were networking with each other, people were discussing, sharing resources and solutions, and people were meeting other people, just bumping into each other in the hallway or over a cup of coffee, someone from the other side of the world, and discussing issues and you know, possible events and outcomes, and sharing ideas to make the world a better place to protect Indigenous rights and territories.
And what do you think are the outcomes of all these meetings?
That's a good question, you know, and sometimes you hear about the United Nations being irrelevant, but actually I don't believe it is now that I've experienced that. The forum does not make policies or regulations or changes. What it is an advisory body to UNESCO, and in turn UNESCO reviews the recommendations that they've heard at the forum, and they decide what they can do and how they can do it to make policy recommendations to the General Assembly. And of course the General Assembly is where the real change happens, and real policies are implemented, and governments are held accountable in hopes to protect, you know, Indigenous rights, sovereignty, and land.
Interesting stuff for sure. Well, we'll have to leave it there, Angel, but thank you so much for giving us a recap of your time in New York City.
Thank you very much.
Great work out there, Angel. I'll volunteer myself to head out there for next year's forum. Canadian Screen Award nominee Cody Lightning is our guest on Face to Face tonight. We've got a preview for you after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Spring has brought many visiting Canadian geese, and Shania Murdoch was able to feed some while strolling through the forks in downtown Winnipeg. Thanks, Shania. Watch out. If you want to be featured as our next photo of the day, send your photos to share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the east coast, 12 with showers in Halifax, sun's out, and 12 in Fredericton. -2 with snow in Kuujjuaq, 5 below, and flurries in Nain. 18 in Montreal, 0 for Val-d'Or. Sunny and +1 in Sault Ste. Marie, sun's out and 3 above in North Bay. 3 for Thunder Bay and Sioux Lookout under sunny skies. 3 in God's Lake and Norway House. Sunny and 19 for Winnipeg, 13 and sunny in Dauphin. 18 in Regina, 20 above for Saskatoon. 20 for Meadow Lake, 13 in La Ronge. Over in northern Alberta, 8 above in Fort Chip, 18 above for Fort McMurray. 20 in Edmonton and Lethbridge, 18 in Calgary. 12 with showers in Vancouver, rain and 19 in Kamloops. 12 with rain for Prince George, 10 in Smithers. +4 with snow in Old Crow, 12 above in Whitehorse. 9 in Yellowknife, a high of 2 with snow in Norman Wells. -15 in Sax Harbor, 14 below in Pawlatuck. -14 in Chesterfield and Whale Cove, 10 below in Arviette. 13 below for Resolute and Arctic Bay. For nearly 3 decades, Cody Lightning has been recognized for a role he played at the age of 5. That's understandable when the role is from the iconic film Smoke Signals. 26 years later, Lightning is directing and acting in a mockumentary he wrote called Hey Victor. In the film, Lightning's trying to make a sequel called Smoke Signals 2, Still Smoking.
When people ask, where does real Cody end and fake Cody come into play? If people have to ask that question, then we did our job very well.
Right.
There's some truth, but it's sprinkled with, fictionalized versions. Like I said, I'm not Cody from Hey Victor, but I amped and, up the stakes of the craziness, the vulgarness, the foul language and the substance abuse and just the nuttiness of him for the film.
You can watch our interview with Cody in less than 2 minutes time, and Hey Victor is streaming now. If you're a fan of mockumentaries like Fubar and Trailer Park Boys, then I guarantee you will love it. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Tuesday. For news anytime, visit our website, aptnnews.ca, and be sure to subscribe to our APTN News YouTube page. I'm Dennis Ward, Marcy Miigwech. Thanks for being with us. Stick around, Face to Face is up next. Have a great night.